This is the story of a man who was married to two wives who happened to be sisters, which is a strange story that we have to understand. And in doing that, we're going to discover the power of a promise. People make promises all the time, and we kind of don't always feel that they're really binding on their conscience. I promise you I'll do this, I'll do that. We avoid swearing. Um, we avoid, obviously, we're told not to take oaths, but just to say to somebody, I will do this, I will do that, I will pay this, I'll pay that. We're kind of flippant about it. And the reason is probably because the promises are not enforceable in law, not in Jewish law, not in secular law. They're just words, and for that reason we tend to not really appreciate the importance of it all. So while we explore the story of Yaakov and his marriages, we're going to get a deeper appreciation into uh, what that really is. So in the parasha, we have the story of Yaakov meeting Rachel at the well. We know he's run away from home, ostensibly because there is a threat to his life through Esav, um, but also, as his parents told he left, to find a wife. And he's going to the home of Lavan. And Lavan, we're told, has two daughters. I don't know which is which in this picture, but I'm going to assume it's the one on the left. But I suppose beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And Yaakov is going to decide that he's going to make a pledge to Rachel and say to her, "We're going to get married." And this happens right away on his first day in this place, Haran, when he meets her at the well. And so after a few days of staying with Lavan, actually a month to be more exact, after a month, when Lavan says to him, you seem to be here for a while, uh, what's the deal? You can't do this for free. So Yaakov says, I'm going to work for 7 years for your daughter Rachel, your younger daughter Rachel, and it's very specific. The Rachel bitcha ktana, for your younger daughter Rachel, hoping that he was very specific and that there would be no room for fraud, deceiving, etc. And Lavan says, "Okay, I'm very gracious here. I'd rather give it to you than give it to an outsider to stay here." But whatever. Yaakov works for Rachel. It's 7 years, and they seem to be just a few days because of his love for her. Then time is up. Yaakov says, "Give me my wife." Um, my time is up. I've done the 7 years, and Lavan organizes a marriage. But of course, we know, substitutes the older daughter, Leah, brings him to him, and this is who he spends the wedding night with. It's only in the morning, we'll come back to that point in a moment, that he realizes that, he's been tricked. And he turns around and says, I worked for Rachel. What have you done? Why have you sent Leah instead? And Lavan's answer is, this is incorrect. Here we don't do this. We never marry off a younger daughter before. We've got protocols. The story should have ended there with Lavan and, Leah and Yaakov living happily ever after, or not so happily, whatever it is, because that's where the story should have ended. But no, this is the deal that Lavan offers. Complete this week, and then that's the week, the bridal week of Sheva Brachos, and then I'll let you marry Rachel at the end of it all. And this is what happened. He waited for the end of this 7 day festivities, and that married Rachel, and that was the end. Now he's got two wives, of course. Now he owes him 7 years of work. Now, the difficulty with this is that the Torah forbids the marriage of sisters concurrently. Isha lachota lo tikach. You may not take a sister, a wife and a sister together, because that is litzuror. That causes trouble, tzoros, enmity between the two of them. And you can see in that word litzror, the word tzara, tsaras. Tzara is a calamity. Actually, the technical name, now we don't have bigamy, polygamy, so we don't have a term for it, but the term for two wives or more married to the same man, what's the relationship? They're not sisters-in-law, they're kind of co-wives. The halachic term or the descriptive term in times when this used to happen was tzara. Tzara means sorrow, because it never worked very well. In fact, the reason why this marriage is prohibited is because we're creating an unnatural situation where, sisters are supposed to love each other. Sisters grow up together. Yeah, maybe. I do remember, I won't mention names, but when a couple of my daughters really, really didn't get along well, and it was kind of pretty bitter. And I remember saying to them, you'll grow up and you'll become best friends and allies. Never, never. When I'm at the house, I'll never talk to her again. Well, famous last words. I'm very proud of the way all my daughters kind of, have bonded and created this partnership. Some stronger than others, but all of them very sisterly. So yeah, sisters are supposed to kind of really have a bond of love. You put them as rivals, ravishing for trying to grab the attention of the same man, that's not very natural. It was quite unnatural and sometimes quite unhealthy in situations, even in the olden days when man had more than one wife, and there was kind of a tension and unhealthiness, and it actually was banned in our faith in the Middle Ages by a man called Rabbi Gershom or Hagolah, I think 12th century, 11th century, when a Gershom was married to two wives. And the reason he married a second wife was because he never had children with the first wife and wanted to fulfill the mitzvah. But there were terrible stories of betrayal and horrible things that happened in their relationship. And he then said, look, even in the case of childlessness, we're not going to do this anymore. And he created a ban which prohibits Ashkenazi men from marrying more than one wife. The ban never really affected the Sephardi world, although pretty much it's accepted right now to the entire Jewish world. But the Torah prohibits sisters from being married to the same man because that relationship is tense and unhealthy. So you may ask, well, this was before the Torah was given. So there weren't laws of the Torah yet, but we find a statement made in our sources, in the Talmud and elsewhere, that in fact, the Avot fulfilled all of the mitzvot even before they were commanded. How would this be? Well, the Avot, there we have. Abram obeyed and kept my charge, my commandments, my laws, my teaching. So Abraham kept the Torah, and the Gemara says on this verse, Abraham kept every single precept of the Torah up and down to rabbinic precepts, including Eruv Tafshilin. Won't go into that now. So how did they know before the Torah was given? Remember that the Avot had a kind of relationship before Hashem, with Hashem, sorry, where they knew exactly what God wanted and expected of them. It was intuitive, like in a very good marriage, where kind of you come home and just by not even the look your wife gives you, but the body language and the aura, you know exactly what she wants. And if it's a good marriage, you'll do it. So Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, they were in tune with God's will, and therefore they could fulfill Hashem's instructions even before they were issued. At the end of the day, the mitzvot are Hashem's will. The mitzvot are the commandments. Hashem wants us to fulfill His ratzon, His will, and they were in tune with that, and they fulfilled it. And so already 2 generations earlier, Abraham, Hashem testifies, obeyed my commandments. Interesting comment that Yaakov himself makes. When he's got to go confront his brother Esav and sends messengers with gifts, this is the message he sends. He says, please tell my lord Esav that I have lived with Lavan and I've been delayed until now. But the choice of word that that Yaakov uses to say, I sojourned, I lived, I stayed with Lavan, he uses the word garti. And if you just change the order of the letters, it spells the famous word Taryag, or 613, which is the number of mitzvot. And Rashi points out that that word garti is 613, which is the word Taryag, 613 mitzvot. And his message was kind of an important message um, to his brother Esav. You're not going to get me, because I've been loyal and faithful to the divine commandments, and that's going to protect me. So that was the message behind the use of that word, garti. And Yaakov is essentially going against this divine commandment and not to be married to two sisters, and particularly as this is a commandment that is very logical and will be given in the Torah a very good reason for it. How do we explain this behavior? And this, it turns out, is something that Yaakov ends up being very tormented about personally. We find that when he leaves Lavan's house and he's actually going home, he tarries. He doesn't go straight home. When I arrive in New York, and the first place from the airport that I go to my parents' home. I hope my children will forgive me, but that's the midst of Kibbutz Av, and I haven't seen them in some time. And some time at the moment means about 5 weeks. And yet I'm longing, and when I next go to New York, that I'll beeline. There is Yaakov traveling back to his homeland, and he's kind of staying in Sukkot, and he's there in Luz, and he's there in Shechem. And commentaries explain his behavior as almost being embarrassed to face his father while he is married to two sisters, because how will he face him being in violation? In fact, when does he go to his father? Right after, very sadly, very tragically, Rachel dies. In the next section, he's making his way to be reunited with his father, Yitzchak. So unfortunately, at that stage, his mother has passed on while he was traveling, but Yitzchak is waiting for him at home. He's not comfortable with his marital status. And there are two midrashic sources that describe his discomfort. The first is Yalkut Shimoni, where Yaakov, at the end of 22 years of separation from his beloved son Joseph, looks back and says, I've been punished. 22 years of separation from my beloved son Yosef, son of my beloved wife, late Rachel. In 22 years is the number of years that I spent, I'm going to use this loosely, living in sin, being married to Rachel and Leah. Have I been punished by 22 years of pain for those 22 years of a marriage that did not conform with the divine will? So it haunts him, it torments him forever. Here's another frightening source in the Talmud. It's in Psachim. It describes a feast that Hashem is going to prepare when Mashiach comes. And all of the great people are going to be sitting around the table, and at the end of the meal, they have to bench. So who are we going to offer the kos shel bracha, the goblet of wine, to make the bracha and lead everyone in benching? So everyone says, well, Abraham is the beginning of all of this. He should lead. He started this journey of the chosen people and of the road to Mashiach, which took thousands of years, and we finally there. Avram Avinu must lead the benching, and Avram declines. He says, no, this is not for me. I will not recite the blessing as I'm blemished, because from me came Ishmael. And Avram will say to his son Isaac, well, you recite the blessing. And Isaac will reply, I cannot, as the wicked Esau came from me. So who's next in line? Yaakov. And Isaac says to Jacob, take the cup, recite the blessing. And he says, no, I cannot, I will not, because I'm married to sisters, Rachel and Leah, in their lifetimes. In the future, the Torah forbade them to me. Although at the time it wasn't prohibited to wed two sisters, this practice would eventually be considered a serious transgression. So Yaakov refuses, and he does not want to be leading the benching. So if this is so something which Yaakov was so uncomfortable with, well, why did he do it? But maybe before I even answer that question, and interestingly, Ramban and Nachmanides takes the view that this practice of the avot to keep all the mitzvot only apply when they were in Israel, and that Yaakov married the two sisters while he was in Mesopotamia, where that kind of good behavior, commitment that the Avodah had taken didn't apply. That's consistent very much with the approach that Ramban takes, that the Torah is really to be observed in the Holy Land, and that those of us in the diaspora, I see no Israeli participants this evening. I hope everyone's well there. Those of us in the diaspora, we're keeping mitzvahs just that they remain practiced, and that we're ready to be able to do it when, please God, we do move to the Holy Land. So that's Ramban's opinion, and it's quite consistent with his own view that that's why the Avot only observed the Torah when they were in Israel. It wasn't upon them; they hadn't taken it on while they were outside, which would also explain perhaps why Rachel died as soon as they came into the Holy Land of Israel, and that's when she passed on, because Yaakov would have been bound to observe, and he couldn't clearly send one of his wives away at that stage. So this is Ramban's opinion. Of course, it's not very congruent with the statement Lavan that Yaakov sent to Esav when he said, I lived with Lavan and observed the Tarag Mitzvot, because Lavan's home, of course, was in Mesopotamia. But before we get to understand how halachically Yaakov was able to do it and why he did something which went against his own kind of conscience, something which plagued him and tormented him for so many years thereafter, let's first understand why he thought it was a good idea. I mean, the Torah gives very good reason. Says it's unnatural to do this to two sisters and put them in that kind of situation. And to understand that, there's a famous medrash once again that explains what happens on that wedding night. I mean, how was it that he was fooled into thinking that he's now being, spending a wedding night with the wrong twin? I mean, how could that possibly be? And the answer is that, well known, Rachel and Yaakov were very aware that father-in-law was extremely capable of behavior like that. And so they convened in a secret code that would be shared in the wedding night. And then at the last moment, Rachel realizes that their worst fears are being materialized. It's actually Leah that's being led to the bridal canopy. And she starts to imagine the pain, the humiliation her sister's going to go through. So as she's being led to the chuppah, she walks over to her and whispers to her, listen, the secret code is, and actually the secret code was the word Chana, which represents the three mitzvot that Jewish women have, Chala, Nida, and Hadlakat Haner, and lighting of Shabbos candles. So this is the secret code, and if you ask for it, there it is. So she gave up, she sacrificed herself. She didn't know what was going to happen. She didn't know that Yaakov would choose to marry anyway. She thought that would never happen. But Yaakov realized that sisters like that are so enmeshed in a deep love, care, and concern for each other that the situation of them being rivals, vying for the attention of the same man, was not going to be problematic. Was he right? Mostly. I mean, there were some difficult moments, but that's for a different time. But on the whole, this worked extremely well. I think the children didn't cope as well with the tensions, but as far as Rachel and Leah were during their lifetime, it seems to have worked far better than any of us would have anticipated. But why did he do it? Why could he simply not say to Rachel, I feel awful? And the answer is that he had made a promise to her. Can you make a promise that goes against a Torah law? Clearly not. I cannot promise to do something which is already mandated by the Torah. But let's remember that Torah wasn't mandatory. That this decision of the forefathers, the Avot, to observe the 613 commandments was totally on a voluntary basis. The statutes were given hundreds of years later at Mount Sinai, and until then, It was kind of a nice thing to do, a good thing to do, and they'd resolved to do it, and they did it. But it was not something which was absolutely statutory, mandatory, and dictated by any kind of law. On the other hand, the promise that he had made to Rachel was binding. Promises were binding and were part of Jewish law even before Matan Torah. I mean, just listen to that conversation between Yaakov and Lavan. He says, "Why did you cheat me?" Well, I'll cheat you. We don't keep our word here. No, there's an expectation that he will keep his word, and therefore he turns around and says, "Why did you cheat me?" So the value of a promise was one that was in place even before the Torah was given, and that takes precedence. Let me give you another illustration of the same concept. Avram Avinu, never circumcised, performed all the mitzvahs, and 613 minus 1, 612. Why did he never circumcise? Because we have a prohibition against self-harm. And that's a prohibition which is in place. It's one of the 7 Noachide laws. Just as one may not take one's own life, one may not, shed one's own blood. And that's a law which is binding already to the Bnei Noach, to the Noachites, to Noach and his children after the flood. So Avram's got a dilemma. Very much would like to perform a bris. It's one of the mitzvot that is going to be mandated, but it hasn't yet, and as such, he's got a problem. He's prohibited. He'd like to have a bris. He longs to have a bris. It's God's will, but he hasn't been commanded to do it. So he's prohibited from self-harm. He's prohibited from shedding his own blood. So there's a similar tension here. Yaakov knows that it's against God's will to be married to 2 sisters. But he's got a promise to keep. He's got his word to keep. And that creates a huge tension. He's given his word to Rachel, he would marry her, and he's bound by that. And this goes against his kind of conscience of, well, I'd like to live Jewishly. I'd like to live a Torah life. And he can't. And this is why he goes ahead and marries her. But this is also why this kind of sits on him throughout his living years and well beyond, as we saw in that quote from Psachim. So there are two takeaways from here, 2 learnings. Number one, the value of a promise. And I started with this by saying, we use words, we make verbal commitments, and it means nothing. And here we see a man that kind of ended up being tormented by a huge personal dilemma that led to discomfort his whole life. Why? Because of a promise. So we would do well to examine the promises we made to people and to do our utmost to keep them, and not to dismiss them and to say lightly, well, it's just words and they have no real impact or moral obligation upon us. That's number one. Lesson number two. Lesson number two is this. You want to be from, not at other people's expense. Because really that's what's happening with Yaakov and Rachel here. When I say you want to be frum, I don't mean fulfill the Torah law. I mean to go beyond the letter of the law and to take it upon himself. And I'll give you a silly example, but there's a mitzvah to, when you wash your hands, use a lot of water so that you kind of pour copious amounts of water on your right hand and your left hand when you wash for a meal. And there was a great rabbi who was particularly careful with this. If you watched him, he would put the cup under the tap, he would fill it, he would, pour it over his hand and do it again, again, again. But he was once a guest in a home, and the other guests noticed that he was, just using the bare minimum of water that's halachically mandated, and he wasn't following this practice of being generous with the water. And they questioned him and said, "Look, this home hasn't got running water. So that means that a domestic has got to go and draw water from a well, pour it into this bucket that we're using. If I use a lot of water, I'm causing an imposition upon others." So this is a lesson to us that when we have what we call a chumrah, we have a situation where we want to go beyond the letter of the law. We're particularly strict with what, the way we're performing a mitzvah. It may never be at the expense of another person. It can never be at the expense of one's shalom bayit or one's relationship with others. One's got to be very careful that our super adherence to divine precepts, just like Yaakov, there he was. He really didn't want to be married to these two ladies because it violated what to him was just a chumrah, which was stringency. He had taken upon himself, I keep Torah law. But there was a promise to Rachel, and so one had to set aside the other. And so he lived this very happily married life. But unfortunately, a spiritual tension and situation which would haunt him right through that married life and well beyond. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening.